Wario World. But I'm mainly doing this because a comment on my previous Wario video insists that the only thing people bring up about this game is the pause music. Not the story, not the gameplay, no, just the pause music. So because of this comment, you all are gonna get a full dive of Wario World with zero mention of the pause music.
Sorry.
All jokes aside, I found this game has the weirdest, strangest, most mysterious development story in the entire Wario franchise, so stick around for that. This time we rewind back to 2003.
Of course, Mario will never start shooting hookers.
When Nintendo was about to launch the first home console game to star their enigmatic anti-hero, Wario. The game is Wario World for the GameCube, released in June 2003, which could be called a 3D variation of their Wario Land series, but most identify this as a spin-off. The game begins with a lot of intro text describing an evil gem known as the Black Jewel.
What do you mean by that?
And this jewel once granted wishes for people, but in return, it would feed on their desires, turning this into its source of power. Evil power. Using this power of desires, the Black Jewel would birth evil spirits, and just before its evil spirits managed to take over, creatures called the Spritelings of the Sacred Forest managed to ensnare the jewel and lock it away deep within their ancient ruins. Cut to thousands of years later. Wario is in his castle filled with riches, laughing at the sheer ridiculousness of his financial gains, and right below him in his treasury is the Black Jewel, released by the sound of his arrogant laughter. So yeah, it's revealed that he's somehow got his hands on this forbidden treasure at one point in his previous adventures, and now that it's unleashed into the world once again, this forces Wario on another quest for glory. The Black Jewel transforming most of his treasures into monsters. So the game throws you into the main hub, and it's time for Wario to get to work. And despite the initial wall of text, the intro moves pretty quickly, so I checked out the instructions manual for some more content. And there's some pretty good lore in here. Ah ha ha, I've finally done it! Wario chuckles to himself as he does some exploring up his nose. Why does he chuckle, you ask? Because he's finally completed construction of his beloved castle. So what do you think? Pretty sweet, eh? The sparkling golden walls, the luxurious chandeliers, and how about these marble floors? Okay, you probably get the point here. And now, on an evening where a red moon rises, the evil Black Jewel awakens. What is all that noise downstairs? I was just getting ready to floss the gunk out of my toes. Gah, I hate distractions. I have to admire the amount of fluff and character development that game manuals add to games sometimes. It's such a lost art in itself, and it gives me an idea for a series, so let me know if you'd like me to just read some old manuals sometime. Anyway, the manual seems to imply that the red moon awakened the Black Jewel instead of Wario just being obnoxious, which I think would have been funnier. But we'll also learn that in its desire to build its own kingdom, the Black Jewel transforms Wario's castle into the setting for the game. This whole manual is oozing with personality. Like, props to whoever wrote this, because everything down to the gameplay mechanics are explained by Wario himself. Fresh liver goes really well with onions, and I could eat 100 plates of that stuff. So what do you think? My tidbits of information are really important, huh? My bad impression aside, this reminds me of the manuals for Donkey Kong Country, with Cranky Kong giving his 2 cents in the book. But the best and most unnecessary part of this manual is this entire breakdown of Wario's body on the last page, where we learn the fact that he weighs 308 pounds, or that his bladder can hold up to 1.1 gallons of fluid. And the reason my guy here also has amazing teeth is because he's capable of eating the bacteria that causes cavities. What a guy. Anyway, the player starts off in the Treasure Square courtyard, the hub where you can access the 4 worlds of this game. The first world is Excitement Central, where you'll get your bearings on the gameplay, and like most Wario Land games, you'll be collecting stuff. Like a lot of stuff. Every level has the same to-do list: beat the boss, collect the gold statue, and find all the treasure in the level. 8 is your key number here. Find 8 red crystals in the level, which will allow you to access the boss room. The golden statue is broken into 8 fragments that need to be found, and there are 8 treasures that also need to be collected in each level. And yes, there are 8 levels in total in this game, and the people that reviewed this game gave it a 7 out of 10.
So I missed.
We're so close. But as you might guess, once you're done with the first level, it's pretty clear how the rest of the game operates. Each world has 2 levels and 3 boss fights, and if you're thinking to yourselves, that sounds kind of short, you're right. That's probably why this game isn't mentioned much, but more on that later. The first world, Excitement Central, is a forest-themed world that's home to Dino Mighty, the first major boss of the game. And this encounter showcases Wario's sheer ridiculous strength, where he grabs this thing by the belly button and pile drives it into the ground with his bare hands. I will say, the boss battles are pretty interesting. World 2 is Spooktastic World, a horror-themed set of levels with a haunted house and circus, where Wario must face the terror of a haunted doll monster and this elf on the shelf. But neither of these compare to the bone-chattering horror of Dual dragon. Oh, I was expecting something scarier. They call them spook dragons in Japanese, so I guess they tried something here, but you can't just make something scary by just adding the word spook to it, come on. World 3 is Thrillsville, which is hard to describe as one theme, since it has an icy mountain level called Shivering Mountains, and a beanstalk level where you climb a beanstalk with these flying magnets, bears, and rams. Like, what is all of this? What is this?
Mentok, this is the garlic dispenser. Wario will pay it money to give him garlic which restores his health. You're such an imbecile.
Okay, Google, chill. And to top it off, the boss of Thrillsville is just some bull wearing underwear. I think I'm starting to see what this game is missing. If you're all watching this and you feel like this game looks and feels wildly different from what came before, not including the 3D part, it's because this is the first mainline Wario title that wasn't developed in-house by Nintendo. At this stage of the game, Wario had 5 Wario Land titles under his belt. I'm including the Virtual Boy game in this, yes. But all of these were developed by a team at Nintendo called Nintendo R&D 1, the studio that was responsible for both Mario Land titles for the Game Boy and other games dating all the way back to Donkey Kong. Now, while they may have had some help from third parties along the way for the Wario Land series, they would serve as the major development team for those titles. But at E3 2002, the press would see a demo of Wario World for the very first time, which received mixed reception, while IGN would describe the game as another potential hit on Nintendo's hands. I also find it funny that they mention his bodily transformations were noticeably absent. Not to worry though, Nintendo has 6 more months to perfect this promising title, and it wouldn't be a Wario game without them. Spoiler alert, they never added those. With an initial release date of November 2002, Nintendo would continuously push back the game's release date, first to May 2003, and then to June 2003. So now the press was pretty curious about who was responsible for developing this game, and in April 2003, Nintendo of America would spill the beans.
Hookers.
Treasure, the studio responsible for Gunstar Heroes, Sin and Punishment, and Ikaruga were the creators of this game, a Japanese studio with a high reputation from the 90s. But strangely enough, as IGN mentions in their reveal article, nobody from the press could get prominent members of Nintendo of Japan to disclose who was working on Wario World in the first place. But there is some history between these teams though. Treasure previously teamed up with Nintendo R&D 1 to develop Sin and Punishment for the Nintendo 64, an action shooter that never reached the West, but regardless was well received in Japan. Apparently during this collaboration, the two companies wanted to work together again and agreed on Wario World as the next project. I can only speculate here, but perhaps this project went through feature creep after their first E3 showing, pushing Nintendo to reach out to Treasure to hop in and co-develop with them. It would explain all the delays and lack of overall content within the game itself. And I'm thinking there's a ton of cut content out there that we just don't know about. Like the fact that there's a dragon and a haunted level as the main boss is a little strange to me. And then the fact that a world called Thrillsville is just a snowy mountain and a beanstalk. It just doesn't correlate for me. I think that there's a lot of content out there that just we haven't uncovered yet. And the coverage of the behind the scenes here is scarce. And seeing how Nintendo was holding their cards close to their chest with the press at the time, this doesn't surprise me. But maybe this story will one day come out. Or maybe one of you can get me in contact with one of the directors of this game, Koichi Kimura or Hitoshi Yamagami, so I can break the story on this and answer these burning questions. Like, why did this game come out in the West a whole year before the Japanese version? Why is it so short? Why was Miyamoto ducking questions about this game? I'm just so curious. All right, in Miyamoto's defense, he didn't have much involvement in this title and probably didn't want to spill the beans for anybody else. So you get a pass this time, sir. But let's get back to the game. While you're exploring these levels for collectibles, Wario will come across Spritelings, the creatures that locked away the Black Jewel in the first place. And as petty revenge, the Black Jewel locks them all up in boxes for Wario to collect. Yes, they serve as yet another collectible, and it may not be obvious why you're collecting them at first, but these things have a major impact on the endings. Wario himself is moving around in 3D for the very first time, so they had to translate his untraditional 2D gameplay style into this new dimension. He can still jump, dash, and ground pound like in the Wario Land titles, but it's 3D. He can throw a punch now. Remember they did the same for Mario in Super Mario 64, and then he never punched in a mainline title ever again? I digress though. Wario has a couple of new moves, the corkscrew conk, where he grabs his legs and flings himself into the air. The other is hyper suction, which I can only describe as Wario imitating Kirby. This It's not cute. He can also perform what are called mad moves, 3 wrestling-like moves that Wario can only pull off after stunning and picking up an enemy, but these are going to be crucial for taking on the bosses within this game. So armed with more ridiculous abilities, Wario will brave World 4, Sparkle Land, which serves as the obligatory desert-themed section of the game. It's home of the Mirror Mansion, which, as the name suggests, is filled with mirror-based puzzle mechanics, and this guy, the Mean MC. What a weird assortment of bosses this game has. I can't give them a consistent theme here, like some of them are eerie, eldritch horrors, while others are goofy or just look like they didn't even want to be in the game. I guess we can chalk this up to the Black Jewel's sense of creativity. The major boss for Sparkle Land is Captain Skull, who battles Wario on his wrecked pirate ship. But once all of these bosses are defeated, this isn't the end of Wario's adventure just yet. Each major boss was in possession of pieces of the huge treasure chest key. Yeah, that's the official name. And this key is needed to open the giant chest where the Black Jewel locked itself away in his newly created world. I have to point out the irony that he escaped the box he was originally sealed in, only to lock himself away in another box in his own world. Maybe Wario's the bad guy here and the Black Jewel just wanted to create a world where he can live in peace. So with all the pieces of the key, Wario unlocks the box, and immediately it's time for the final showdown. No build-up, we're ending this right now. The boss is mainly the Black Jewel firing lasers at Wario while he attempts to free the Spritelings trapped within the stage, so that they can use their powers to seal the jewel away again. I'm just kidding. Wario knocks them into the jewel to give himself the opportunity to damage it. Yeah, that's more like it. And after a few hits, the Black Jewel is finally destroyed, with the Spritelings deciding to dance in purgatory for Wario, offering to rebuild his ruined castle. So depending on how many of the Spritelings you collected through your journey, your ending will vary. But before we get to that, the credits have an awesome beatbox sample. So the castle the Spritelings provide at the end is unfortunately just a still picture with Wario commenting on the quality. So if you really didn't care to save Spritelings throughout the game, you may just end up with a tent in a dark forest or a castle made of wood. Collect all 40 and Wario gets a castle even more ridiculous than the one he started with. I think it's a nice little addition harkening back to previous Wario Land titles, but I would have loved a reward to allow us to walk around the castle that we got at the end of the game. So I mentioned earlier that the game released in the West a whole year before it dropped in Japan, and while I don't know the reason why they would release in the US first, there are some minor differences between the US and Japanese versions of the game. For example, the Black Jewel boss had a whole new phase added to it once Wario does enough damage in the Japanese version, complete with new music and new attack phases from the Black Jewel. Yes, in this phase, Wario can no longer rely on the Spritelings to help him. He and the Black Jewel go at it in hand-to-laser combat. So while the Black Jewel has all of these new attack patterns you have to avoid, the objective for Wario is to just keep punching the jewel until it stops moving.
I'm fighting for my life!
But this is like the coolest boss phase in the game, and we never got it. But this is the TheMentok channel. I had to dig deeper, and I had to pay $5 for a retro gaming issue to confirm why this boss phase exists in the first place. Masato Maegawa, the founder of Treasure, wrote several memoirs for the entire Treasure library for Retro Gamer, and had this to say regarding Wario World. We made the Japanese version of Wario World after the overseas edition had been released, so we took the opportunity to make various changes. For example, the main programmer was particularly attached to the last boss, so for the Japanese version, we did a remake. Really, we wanted to make the game a bit bigger and pack in some extra features, but there was only so much that we could do. So yeah, it really makes me feel like a lot more was planned here for both editions of the game. As for the other various changes Maegawa mentions here, it's mainly a few bug fixes from the overseas edition, with the Black Jewel boss being the biggest update that they made. Now, I know I made quite a few jokes throughout this video about the game itself, so let me clarify. I'm not saying it's a bad one. In fact, it's a pretty charming game overall, but I'd say for a Wario Land title, it's of pretty average quality. This was the title that came out after arguably the best mainline title in the series, Wario Land 4. And while this game might be just as short as Wario World, it's packed with these impressive visuals, personality, 10 unique transformations, and immaculately polished boss designs. I mean, look at the pixel work on this. Wario World didn't seem to build on this formula much, even with the power of the GameCube at its disposal. And a lot of people weren't even aware that this game existed at the time, myself included. I didn't get a chance to play this game until many years later. So maybe back in 2003, Nintendo was trying to get this game out as quickly as possible, seeing that the GameCube wasn't selling very well for them at the time. But despite all of this, it received decent reviews on release, averaging 7 out of 10s, and managed to sell around 250,000 copies in the US, and over in Japan, 142,000 copies. I don't think this was a commercial success for Nintendo, and maybe the sales numbers can be chalked up to the performance of the GameCube overall. But there's also the possibility that people were Wario'd out, seeing that the WarioWare series made its debut in the US a month before for the Game Boy Advance. In fact, those treasures that you've been collecting within the levels of Wario World unlock demos of mini-games from WarioWare Inc. But of course, you need a Game Boy Advance and link cable to play those. I'm so glad that Nintendo DS and Wii took us into the age of Wi-Fi, because that link cable thing was starting to get very ridiculous. But between these two games, WarioWare would come out on top, and as for Wario World, we wouldn't get another 3D mainline title after this ever again. And seeing that there is more WarioWare games than Wario Land games as of 2024, it's obvious what Nintendo thinks is more lucrative for them. But forget Nintendo, forget the reviews. I highly suggest that you guys go out there and grab a copy of this for yourselves. You can find it online for only...
Oh shit!
Well, I guess unless you're emulating this title, it will remain the Wario game that nobody talks about or has played.